All right, everyone. Again, greetings and welcome to the First Friday event of the Association for the Anthropology of Consciousness for the 2024-2025 academic year. I am extremely pleased to welcome our speaker today, Stan Krippner, who is not just a dear man and a wonderful human being, but is a legend in our field and has been one of the spiritual godfathers of the anthropology of consciousness. Stan began his kind of legendary and somewhat controversial professional career many, many years ago at the Maimonides Dream Center, where he did some groundbreaking work on dream telepathy. He has been involved in the faculty of Saybrook Institute. He is currently on the faculty of the California Institute for Integral Studies. And as he and I just discovered or rediscovered right before we opened you guys up, he is also a huge Grateful Dead fan. And he went to one of the shows of Dead and Company at the Sphere. And I went to 8 of those shows, so I know exactly what he's talking about. And so he's a good friend with Mickey Hart, among other things. So he's been involved in research with rhythm and how it affects the brain, including the aging brain, so to speak, the neurodivergent brain. This is a man who's washed an incredible number of waters. So that's all I want to say. I'm going to turn the floor over to the man himself and let you guys talk to Stan Krippner. I'm going to put everybody on mute just in case, including myself. Stan welcomes any questions. And if you have any difficulty understanding anything, don't hesitate to raise your hand and we can backtrack and you can ask him a question or put it in the chat. He does want questions and discussion after he's done talking. So make notes, everybody. Stan, it's all yours.
Well, thank you so much, John. As you know, I've been a longtime supporter and member of the Anthropology of Consciousness journal and our conferences. I have many, many wonderful memories of the conferences, and I treasure the colorful T-shirts that were available at some of those conferences. And whenever I wear them, it brings back all those wonderful memories of all the wonderful people, including yourself, that have gotten together to discuss these important anthropological topics. So today, I'm going to try to dredge up enough memories to talk about my encounter with the famed Mexican healer and shaman, Maria Sabina. And it all started in the late 1950s when Life magazine had an article, and on the cover it said "Searching for the Magic Mushrooms," and I was intrigued and I read the article. And of course, this was Gordon Wassen's account of his visit to Maria Sabina. He gave her a false name to protect her privacy. Worked for a while, but not forever. And he described how he and his photographer tracked her down because there had been rumors that the sacred mushrooms were still being used. Conventional wisdom said that the Spanish had wiped out the practice because it was heretical, and they did wipe it out in most of Mexico, but in Puerto de Jimenez, the town of Oaxaca, it simply went underground, and Maria Sabina was conducting these sacred ceremonies with local people. Now, there's even an entire book written about Maria Sabina's life. I don't have to recall that in detail, but the important point is that she originally ate the mushrooms simply because she was hungry. She came from a very, very poor family. And then, of course, she began to have these visions, and she was called upon in the visions to help people. Now, of course, she was a Roman Catholic. This is part of the colonization. And so in her vision, it was Jesus Christ who came to her and gave her permission to heal people and to help people. So she began to conduct a series of Bevadas, nighttime ceremonies. And this was done, of course, very, very quietly. And then Gordon Wasson, the New York banker who, with his wife Valentina, had a hobby of mushrooms, heard these rumors that the mushroom ceremonies were still being performed underground in Oaxaca, and he and his photographer took a trip. And they asked townspeople if this is true, that the ceremonies are still being performed. And, oh, no, we're good Roman Catholic. We wouldn't think of doing anything like that. Well, he continued to press his gate, and then Maria Sabina came forth, and she said, I had a vision last night that Jesus Christ told me that I was to share this knowledge with you because the world needs to know about it. So they had a ceremony, a velada, and in the velada, Gordon Wasson had a vision of his son being in dire condition. He came back to his home and found that, yes, this is very true. His son was in critical condition, but he had been healed and he was fine now. So then Gordon Wasson and Valentina together went back to Oaxaca and again took the sacred mushrooms. And all of this is described in detail in the Life magazine article. So when I read the Life magazine article, that is what sparked my interest in psychedelics. Now that's a little bit tangential, but this led to my being a volunteer in Timothy Leary's infamous studies at Harvard University. And I was the last person to take psilocybin, which of course is the active ingredient in the mushroom, the last person to take it legally before him, shall we say, went off the deep end. However, and again, this is tangential, I began to interact with members of that community, mainly Sidney Cohen, who was a psychiatrist who wrote the wonderful book, The Beyond Within, which described the effects of LSD and the psychedelics. Sidney Cohen and I were called upon to co-edit a special issue of the Journal of Psychoactive Drugs, pulling together chapters from different people who discussed various aspects of the psychedelics. And again, this led to my contact with Gene Houston and Robert Masters, two of the early explorers of psychedelics before the government did the clampdown. And that clampdown, as you well know, lasted pretty much for half a century. And now, finally, in the late 19th century, early 20th century, it's been revived, and there is some excellent research going on, and also some disasters, like the movie and television star who was given too many doses of ketamine by unscrupulous physicians, died, and now, of course, the case is in court, and of course, that really set back psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. That's a whole other trip. So back to Mexico, I began writing short articles about psychedelics, and again, never having met Maria Sabina, but I mentioned her name, and out of the blue, I got a letter from Salvador Roquet, a psychiatrist in Mexico City. And he said that he wanted to invite me to observe some of his sessions. And there were a number of miscommunications. I responded to him. He was off the field trip, and then he responded to me, and I was off at a professional meeting. So our encounter didn't take place until, again, I went to Mexico for an anthropological conference where I gave a paper on Huatlaque, the goddess of the serpent shirt that some of you know about, and showed the slides that I took of her in the famous Anthropological Museum in Mexico City. That was quite an event. And then after that conference was over, I was taken to Salvador Cat's studio, where he held one of his psychedelic sessions. We'll never forget it. I was with my wife and also my secretary, Irene Lozano, who spoke Spanish, was able to translate. And Salvador Cat gave about maybe 2 dozen people various psychedelics. And he chose the psychedelics tailored to each person and their needs. This was quite a session because as the effects are coming on, there's a large movie screen, and he showed a number of slides that stressed sex and violence to really get their emotions keyed up. And then a segment from the Hollywood movie, The Dirty Dozen, very, very violent segment. And so this is not a calm and peaceful psychedelic session, as later I found out characterized a session in the United States. But it worked for the people. They were sobbing, crying, laughing. And one young man was crying. He said, my father had disowned me because I was gay, and I'm so sorry I lost contact with my father. But, you know, I have a vision of him right now. I see that he's coming to me, and he says that he is accepting me as I am. And then he realized that he was a flesh and blood father. Cerebral credit actually persuaded the father to forgive his son, accept the son the way he was, and come to the session. So the two of them had this incredible reunion. And I was able to witness it, and I spoke enough Spanish, another term of Spanish, to understand what was going on. And the son was happy to see his son, but also he was very, very angry at his son, at his father disowning him. So they had a back and forth encounter, ended up embracing, and so they lived happily ever after. Well, that was one of the vignettes that I observed. So, of course, I began to publicize what Salvador was doing. And at that time, the Spring Grove Hospital in Baltimore was running real psychedelic sessions. That was for patients, but for professionals who wanted the psychedelic experience. And they brought Salvador to Baltimore to describe what he was doing. And they never heard anything quite like that before. And of course, he had to have a translator, Rick Jensen, who some know of, the translator. And he kept coming back to Baltimore a couple of times and was hired as a consultant for their work. So this put Salvador Roquette in the highlight, and I maintained my contact with him over the years. And at one point, he said to me, I should mention that in Mexico, he's actually put in jail, and I wrote letters explaining how what he was doing was so important, and he was out of jail. He gave credit to me in my letter, but other people wrote letters also. In gratitude, I know that you have always wanted to meet Maria Sabina. I know her, and I will take you with me on my next expedition. Worthy, I never had imagined any thought this would happen. So there was a small group of us who went to Mexico City, and I was the only one with a credit card, so I was able to rent a car. There was another car available from a member of Salvador's staff. So we had a convoy of 2 cars with perhaps a small group, maybe 4 or 5 people in each car. And as we went on the highway to cross the Jimenez, there were little crashes on the highway where cars had fallen off the cliff, killing everybody in the car. So it was sort of an unforgettable trip. And once we got to cross the Jimenez, a little small hamlet, but very charming, I remembered some of the history, very important. Gordon Washington had hidden Maria Sabina's identity by giving her a false name, Marcela Gomez or something like that. But some enterprising reporters and other interested people tracked her down. And then there began to be sort of a string of people, primarily hippies, who had the money to travel from, shall we say, well-educated and wealthy parents. And they turned this charming little hamlet into a slum because they didn't have personal hygiene. They didn't clean up after themselves. Things got so bad, the Mexican army actually came in and threw them all out. And that was the end of the Exodus. And in the meantime, Maria Sabina was in trouble because some of the townspeople said, now you have spoiled everything. The mushroom will no longer have the magic for us. And they decided to get back on her. They would kill her. And they, oh no, she's so old, she's going to die soon. So they killed her son. And the death of her son marked her for the rest of her life. And yet the sadness that shows up in the photograph that we took of her. So Maria Sabina didn't have an easy life. And I should mention that she began to use the mushrooms to help and to heal people, and then she got married. Once she got married, she was not allowed to officiate at the Veladas again. That was, of course, sexist, but that was the custom. And so Maria Sabina had a very abusive husband and fortunately passed on. So she started to administer the Veladas again. But then she fell in love, got married again. This time to a very benevolent husband. That was a very, very lovely career for her. And then he died. So she went back to administering mushrooms and the Veladas. And that was during the time that Gordon Washington actually came down, for better or for worse, and wrote the article for Life magazine. So, knowing all of that, we arrived in Huaca de Jimenez, and very, very small hotel, and we all had very smart but very clean and pleasant rooms. And then there was hot water 1 hour a day outside with sort of a faucet. And so we took turns going in and out of the hot water to take showers and clean up. Also, we ate delicious Mexican food prepared by townspeople who, of course, were very delighted with our arrival because this meant a little bit of money coming into the community. And so we were very, very welcomed, and that helped a lot. So then the day arrived, for a visit to see Maria Sabina, and one of the members of our group was Eric Pepper, now a very famed biofeedback researcher and author, Gay Luce, who was a journalist who covered it, Walter Houston Clark, who was a professor who had taken an early interest in psychedelics, wrote a marvelous book on chemical ecstasy. The people had been very carefully chosen, and then there were a couple of Taylor Roquette's patients. So when Maria Sabina understood that she was going to be photographed, Bonnie Collage, the member of our group, was a professional photographer who photographed Hollywood stars. She went into her little house and put on her weeple, her ceremonial robes. Now, the little house had been built for her by the Mexican government. It was high on a cliff, sort of in the clouds, very, very picturesque. And of course, she lived a very, very frugal life. And her two daughters were living with her. And her daughters were somewhat envious of her mother's fame. And when we took the photograph of Maria Sabina, they wanted to be photographed too. And they said, oh, we're Sabina too. We're Maria Sabina too. Mr. Mercer had already told them, no, you do not have the don, D-O-N, you do not have the gift. You cannot be sabia. Sabia, of course, is the term locally, what we would call shamans. So we had to cope with the envious daughters and also honor Maria Sabina. And we realized she did not speak Spanish. So she spoke the local dialect, and somebody translated the dialect into Spanish. Somebody else translated Spanish into English. Well, it wasn't too much of an interview because we were busy taking these photographs. It was all written up in the article that you folks are welcome to read. So I was wearing a sports jacket, and I gave it to Maria Sabina to protect her against the cold because she lived up so high that occasionally it is chilly. And I also gave her all of the Mexican pesos that I had and thanked her profusely. And then we left. Now, fast forward. The next day, we returned, and Maria Sabina was wearing the jacket I'd given her. What happened to the money? Her daughters had taken it and bought beer with it, and they were drunk in a coop. We saw bottles of beer all around the place. And so not much of that money went to Maria Sabina, sad to say. But in between the visits, Maria Sabina told us that she was too old to hold the veladas anymore. The stress was too much for her at her advanced age. But she referred us to Doña Clotilda, again, who became a well-known sabia, and who was written up in a forthcoming book edited by Michael Winkelmann, Field Trips to Indigenous Healers. And Doña Clotilda welcomed us into her little sanctuary adjoining her house, and people chipped in, gave her what pesos we had as a donation, which is typical. I have made many field trips of this nature. I always give something to the people that I interview, money or gifts or clothing or whatever, so that they get something in exchange for all the knowledge that they give me. So, Dona Clotilda welcomed us, and this is the dry season, and so we don't have a lot of mushrooms. And so one of you will have to sit it out. And I said, look, I've already had mushrooms, I'll be happy to sit it out. Oh, well, that you could be my assistant. Wonderful. I learned more being her assistant than I would have learned if I had taken the mushroom. So in her little sanctuary, had a concrete floor, and there were pine boughs.
Sound is gone.
Stan, you got muted accidentally. Can you go back a little bit, please?
You got muted.
John, I think you can unmute him.
Yeah, let me see
Yep,
where
control.
I have control.
You have audio control.
Blah, 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 blah.
Okay, how is this?
There you go. Thank you. I'm so sorry, Stan, you got muted. So if you can go back about 30 seconds in your story.
I'll come back. All right. Okay, so Dona Cotilla said that this was dry season. She didn't have mushrooms for everybody, and one of them would have to sit out. So I volunteered. I said, look, I've had the mushrooms. I'll be happy to sit out. Then she did. You can be my assistant. And I learned more being her assistant than I would have learned taking the mushrooms. I noticed there were pine boughs on the floor of her little chapel, sanctuary. And she gave me some candles, and she said, we need to stick the candles on the floor. And so I noticed that she was pouring the candle wax on the floor and sticking the candle on the wax. I did the same thing. Mine didn't stick very well. Well, I was very clumsy as a gringo, of course. And then I noticed her candles were level at the bottom. Very easy to stick them in the wax. Mine were bumpy at the bottom. Hard for me. She gave me the hard candles. And of course, it made her look good. Didn't mind. That's part of the show business aspect of shamanism that I've run into before. So we finally got all the candles lit. And by that time, people had taken mushrooms. We passed out the few mushrooms that there were, but they were extremely effective. Walter Houston Clark began to have, for the first time in all of his psychedelic sessions, some intense negative vampires swirling around. And she sent me to him to advise him. And I said, you know, these are probably benevolent vampires, because vampire bats, one species, take their own blood and give it to their young to nurture them. Yes, vampires suck blood, but this species of vampire does it for benevolent purposes to help the young. So that made Walter Houston Clark feel better, and that was resolved. So then Dona Cotilla sent me to a couple, the other part of the room, who were having trouble. One was a concert pianist, and he had gotten stage fright. He could no longer perform. He was a client of Salvador Roquette. The other was an American, a former Miss Kentucky. And as she grew into her 40s, her life became problematic. All her life, she had depended on her beauty to carry her through. But as her beauty began to wane, so did her life. So, under the influence of the mushrooms, they had dramatic realizations, and the concert pianist resolved his stage fright, went on to resume his career. The Miss Kentucky found inner resources he could pull upon, and all of those came out in the mushroom ceremonies. they were telling me about this, and I was sitting in the middle. The concert pianist is kissing me on one cheek, the Miss Kentucky on the other cheek. Ordinarily, this would have been a pleasure, but they were both reeking of vomit, so it was very hard for me to retain my composure and interact with them. And then I realized what all of the pine boughs on the floor of the sanctuary were for. They were to provide pleasant smells because people were vomiting all over the place. So that was an extremely interesting session. And I volunteered one little bit of thing for Dona Clotilda. Some of her candles would not light easily because the match would go out. I had brought with me some long-lasting light lighters, and so I helped bring all of the candles to life with those special water-resistant matches. I gave my box of water-resistant magics to Dona Clotilda. That was my contribution so that she could perform magic for her next group of clients. So, morning came, and we all went out into the sun, and there was Salvador Roquette, and he led a group integration session where everybody would talk about their experience and would integrate what they had learned into their psyche. Again, he did not speak Spanish, so he didn't know too much what was going on, but again, he orchestrated very well, and enough people were able to translate so that he got the gist of what was going on. Yes, all the people in that little ceremony spoke English. And so Salvador did not comprehend all of the discussion taking place. Didn't matter. He had orchestrated it all. And so the sort of needless group therapy session worked very, very well. So we had an incredible time, and as I say earlier, we went back to see Marie Sabina for one last visit, and her drunken daughters and the beer bottles and all of that. And then we started our trek down the steep road again with all the crosses marking where people had been in carts falling off the cliff. Coming down was even more treacherous than going up. We got to the main highway. Now I was telling people, if we survive and get to the main highway, I'm going to kiss the ground. They don't believe me. But if we got to the main highway, stop the car, I'm going to kiss the ground. And I certainly did. After that torturous journey, which I will never, never forget. So, the car that I had rented had a scratch on it due to all of the incredible driving that was involved. And so before I went to leave the car, again, I took some mud and plastered it over the scratch. And of course, the document I had signed said that I would never take the car on country roads. And so I unfortunately violated the document. I was glad to leave the area before I was arrested once they discovered that their car was a little bit damaged, and got back to Mexico City in fairly good shape with a lot of memories. So I followed the trajectory of Maria Sabina, and after our group left, she got married again for the third time. And didn't matter. She was now too old to perform the veladas, and so she was able to enjoy the company of her third husband until her death at the very, very ripe old age, I think at 93 or something like that. So Maria Sabina, actually is a historic figure. We might call her the godmother of ethnomycology, the study of mushrooms from an ethnological point of view. And of course, she never realized the importance of what she had done, the importance of her contributions to anthropology, to the general culture, and of course, she is now a legendary figure. And I was so fortunate to have that contact with her. That contact with her triggered by that Life magazine article that I read in 1957 or something like that. So, Salvador Roquette did some balladas in the United States. In one of them, the police came in and arrested everybody when they were at the peak of their psychedelic session. You know, it'd be just like if the police had come into a Roman Catholic church and arrested the police during High Mass. Well, they shunted everybody off to jail, including some friends of mine, and the lawyers had to come in to get them up. I think they paid a token fine or something like that. So at that point, Salvador Roquette developed what he called his vivancias, a group encounter without psychedelics, but one that was embedded by music, by visual effects, by multimedia, and people seem to get a great deal out of his vivancias, even though there were no psychedelics directly involved. But again, this was the ambiance, the charisma of Salvador that made those vivancias so effective. I last saw Salvador Roquette in San Francisco in a hot tub spa, which coincidentally we both visited at the same time. He gave interviews to newspapers in the United States who were very eager for new information about psychedelics. And he passed away, in my opinion, far too early. But again, he is sort of a historic figure in the field of psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy for his contributions. And the Spring Grove Research Center, of course, had to close down. But one of the key people, Bill Richards, hung in there, and today he is still active in the field during what has been called the psychedelic renaissance. So there you are. That is my story of Maria Sabina, the godmother of ethnomycology. I think this would be a good time, John, to see if we have any questions, and we can certainly have some discussion.
Well, thanks, Sten. Thank you very, very much for that. That was a fascinating presentation. Many of the names you mentioned, Walter Huston Smith, Salvador Roquette, Timothy Leary, these are, of course, are some of the founding figures of psychedelic studies and tangentially involved with the anthropology of consciousness. So it was wonderful to hear how you wove those all together. I would like to just open up the floor to see if anyone has some questions or perhaps something you would like to add to Stan's talk, perhaps from your own perspectives. I'm going to ask you guys if you do to hold your hand up. I'm going to change the way I see. So if you've got your hand up on your little screen, I can call on you. Anyone want to ask a question? I can see Claire. Claire, you'll have to unmute yourself, of course.
Okay, unmuted.
Great. Perfect.
This is very simple, but what was Maria Sabina like as a person?
What is Maria like as a person? Well, again, this has been discussed in her biography, I think by Elvis Estrada. Anyway, I have a copy of it. Wonderful book. And she was very, very gifted because in her balladas, she would spontaneously chant beautiful poetry. Remember, she took the mushrooms as well. And her poetry is lovely. Actually, some performing artists have recited her poetry as a one-person show to great acclaim. And in her poetry, in her balladas, she makes such statements as, I am the sun, I am the moon, I am a woman with the keys, I unlock the door. Spontaneous poetry, which is lovely. And there's actually a recording of her chanting by Folkway Records, which I'm sure is still available, and so people can hear it and can also hear her singing in her original music, as well her original music. So she was extremely gifted as a creative artist, as well as being a very splendid interlocutor in her mushroom balladas, but also very, very modest. And again, her reputation, her fame had mixed results. Remember that she lost her son, and that marked her, made her sad for the rest of her life, for all good reasons. And in my contact with her, in our little group's contact with her, again, we were very, very struck by her modesty, her very unassuming manner. And when she went into her little house to put on her weeple and came out, it was like a vision. She was just shining. And one of them actually started to cry. She was just overwhelmed with emotion. And so Maria Sabina picked some flowers from the nearby bush and took the flowers to brush this young woman's face and body and bring her back to where she was grounded again. So very spontaneously, she knew exactly what to do to help this sudden unburst of emotion. Again, I had only two encounters with her, but of course I remember them very, very vividly. And I hope that this helped to answer your question as to what she was like as a person.
Yes, thank you. That's good. Thank you.
And I did put a link to the Folkways recording of Maria Sabina's chanting. I didn't look real quick to see if it's still available or out of print, but it's for the Smithsonian, so it's probably still available, if nothing else, as a digital download. Do we have other questions or comments? And I would like to open it up too. I talked to Stan before this. It doesn't have to be specifically about Maria Sabina. If you're curious about pretty much anything that has to do with what Stan's been involved in over his long career, please don't hesitate to ask.
Well, of course, I was sort of a witness to some of the interesting events and people that launched the psychedelic era. One has to remember that there is actually research going on before the days of Timothy Leary, involving, let's just say, several hundred patients and clients. And this is in the days when psychedelics, notably LSD, were considered psychotomimetic, mimicking psychosis. And of course, that was incorrect. Took a while for that labeling to be dropped. And they were called hallucinogens. Again, not exactly correct, because the imagery that came, yes, you told them hallucinations, but they were much different than that because they had deep meaning to the people who were taking them. And then perhaps you know about the origin of the word psychedelics and Humphrey Osmond and Aldous Huxley and their interchange. Aldous Huxley wanted to call them fantasticons. And Humphrey Osmond rejoined, if I remember correctly, with a poem, to descend to hell or sound or for angelic, just take a bit of psychedelic. And he took the word psyche and delic from two different ancient language origins and put them together. And that is a term that stuck. Now, years later, there were other terms introduced, and some of the terms stressed their connection to spiritual experiences, but they do not always lead to spiritual experiences. So I like the term psychedelic, which I think covers just about everything. So to continue to respond to that question that you posed, when I took psychedelics psilocybin, the last legal session, I had an incredible time, and I've written that up in great detail, of course. And at the height of my session, I was in Washington, D.C., and there was a picture of Abraham Lincoln. And somebody shouting, "The president has been shot." And then his image faded to that of John F. Kennedy. Again, somebody said, "The president has been shot." And sure enough, a year later, Kennedy actually was shot. Well, that was in some ways, of course, precognitive, but then that faded to a sea where I and our fellow participants were on a raft. And in the sea, a figure emerged which looked very much like a Hindu avatar or some sort of prophetic figure. Very, very benign. And the message was, I'm sure you're going through so much trouble. I cannot help you. You need to help yourself. But I have compassion for you. And I think that really marked some of my worldview. I don't expect that humans are part of a grand design or a grand evolution that is bestowed upon them by some supernatural entity. I have a more bottom-up rather than a top-down view of spirituality. People have to fend for themselves and create their own destiny. And again, I'm very existentialist in that point of view, existence before essence. And so that episode in my psychedelic session sort of was a nice metaphor for my worldview. So what happened to Timothy Leary, Ram Dass, and Ralph Mester through Harvard trio was something that I actually had some contact with. Ralph Mester went on to have a brilliant academic career and the author of some beautifully written books. I read Ralph's books and I think I should never write a book again. I can never write as well as he writes. His book, The Philosopher's Stone, has a little vignette of all of the important people that he met on his psychedelic journeys. And Ram Dass, of course, that's a whole other story. Yes, we kept in touch. And I saw Ram Dass again at Laura Huxley's 90th birthday party, if I remember correctly. It was a gala event in a park. Ram Dass had just had a stroke. And he would start a sentence, and then how long the martial artist would dance the rest of his sentence. And I went up to greet Ram Dass, who of course I had known since his days as Richard Alpert. And he was articulate enough to say, yes, Ted, when I first met you, you were all in your head, but now I can see you're all in your heart. I thought, oh my God, what a beautiful compliment, and it's probably true. So Timothy Leary, I saw frequently, and as you know, he was jailed. He was crossing, oh my God, what a saga, crossing the border in Mexico, and his son had brought some marijuana with him, and he hid it in Tim's daughter's bra, and the Mexicans caught it in me, and Timothy said it was his marijuana. He was lying to protect his children, and then he went off to jail. His children, I did not know well. His son had an ambivalent relationship with Tim. His daughter, very, very sweet person. I was invited to Timothy Leary's wedding to a beautiful Swedish model that didn't last very long, but the reception was marvelous, and the wedding cake had Shakti and Shiva embracing on top of the wedding cake. And Tim's daughter was drinking champagne, had a little bit too much, and of all things, she came on to me, and I said, you need to find somebody your own age. I'm very flattered, but there's plenty of young men around your own age that you can interact with. Her name was Susan, by the way. Susan wanted to go off on her own. She went to New York City to try to make it on her own. She didn't succeed. She came back to Millbrook, where Tim was living at the time, Millbrook in this country estate that he ensconced in due to some rich people who owned the estate. And she wanted to come back quietly, no chance. Tim had big banners, welcome home, Susan, embarrassed her to death. The poor woman. Last time I saw her was in a houseboat in Sausalito, very gala affair, and there was Susan scrubbing the floor. I said, Susan, come and join the party. Other people can clean the floor. Oh no, the floor has stains of it. I have to clean the floor. Oh my God, this poor girl is psychotic. And shortly after that, she took her own life. So I last saw Ralph Mester at a gala event just actually a few months before he died. And he was very, very gracious, and he, you are my oldest living friend. Well, he was right. I had outlived anybody else. And I was so happy that he had such pleasant interactions with Ralph during his academic career. And of course, he was present at a transpersonal conference in Manaus, Brazil, that I was invited to. And this is sort of an unforgettable event because after the conference, people could go for an ayahuasca session if they wanted to do so, off in the sort of wooded area. And Ram Dass was there at the conference, and the bus could only hold so many people. And so the organizer of the event said, one of you will have to stay behind. And I couldn't stay behind because I was with a group of people who wanted my guidance. So Ram Dass said, I will stay behind. Very, very unselfish of him. So people got on the bus and said, one empty seat, go back and get Ram Dass. Went back to get Ram Dass. It's too late, I've already had my dinner. And of course, you cannot take ayahuasca with a full stomach. Very gracious of him. So we all went to the ayahuasca session. It's a good thing I went along because people were having trouble. People were vomiting and throwing up. And so I went from person to person to help drown them. Just as I've done that several times in my psychedelic career, helping drown people and bring them back so they can enjoy the experience rather than being disturbed by the experience. So I was going back and forth, taking people up to the wooded area to vomit. Didn't have much of a chance myself, but I did have a very, very vivid ayahuasca imagery of going from tent to tent and actually having a sexual experience with goddesses, Venus, Aphrodite, Urdula, etc., Yemanja, from various traditions. And then all of my revelries interrupted because somebody needed my help. They had to help drown them, take them off the vomit, bring them back. There was a little band singing Icaros, the little songs that accompany the ayahuasca rituals. A beautiful piece of addition, and the music helped to ground people. So anyway, back to the conference. I was able to give my talk, and then I ended my talk by reciting in Portuguese a song from the movie and stage play, The Kiss of the Spider Woman. And it just blew everybody away. Yes, I had studied Portuguese at the University of Wisconsin. And I remembered the lyrics well enough. I thought, well, this would be a wonderful ending for my talk. These lyrics from Kiss of the Spider Woman. I sang them in Portuguese and then translated them in English. Well, the ayahuasca session was, as I say, quite momentous. I had been on other ayahuasca sessions by that time, led by more knowledgeable people and sometimes indigenous people. So all put together, I have had a few wonderful ayahuasca sessions, and I'm glad that it's getting the attention it deserves. I co-authored a book on the allure of suicide. In one chapter of the book, I wrote about how ayahuasca, the vine of the spirits, has been used to prevent suicide and to treat people who are suicidal. That literature is very little known of. But I'm a member of an ayahuasca research group, an online group. And so I keep in touch with all of the legitimate research being done with ayahuasca. And it's considerable, especially written up in non-English languages. A huge body of literature, very, very, very valuable group of articles in that. So back to the conference in Manaus. It was actually my second trip to Manaus. I'd always wanted to visit Manaus, which is deep in the Amazon, because it has such a colorful history. And I hope I'm not boring you with these reminiscences, which is pertinent to anthropology, of course. And there was a delightful Baroque opera written about the Amazon in Manaus, and I had the recording of the entire opera. And much to my delight, when I was in Manaus for the first time, the opera house had been revived and redecorated, and they were performing that opera. It was one of the high spots of my operatic career. Never thought I would see the opera performed. Yes, it was all indigenous people, it was all fictitious, but it was a beautiful Baroque opera, nonetheless. And on that visit, my German friend and I were booked to go on a little ship to tour the Amazon, and our alarm didn't go off, so we missed the ship. But the hotel put us in a motorboat, and the motorboat ran out so we could hit the ship. And as they did so, we passed the point of the meeting of the waters where the Amazon and the tributary meet, and blue and gray waters merge. And as we hit that point, pink dolphin jumped out of the sea to greet us. We got on the boat for the rest of the tour. So during that trip, that first trip to Manaus, I was hosted by some Air Force cadets. And they had not much to do with the Air Force, being in the middle of the jungle, so they became gourmet chefs, and they prepared these delicious meals for us. And they took us to see the military zoo where animals were kept that they would recognize. I felt so badly for these poor animals, the little jaguars and the pumas and all of that. Very cramped in the little cages. The hotel I was staying in had its own zoo and plenty of room for the animals, to move around. And then there was also a city zoo, which was marvelous, with many, many animals from the jungle, plenty of room for them to interact. So I actually saw 3 zoos during my time in Manaus. The conference that I mentioned, the Transversal Psychology Conference, yes, Ralph Metzer was also there. The group of young kids there, sons and daughters of some of the participants, and I interacted with them, told them some stories, and acquainted them a little bit with the history of the area. And at the end of the conference, our favorite, Uncle Stanley and Uncle Ralph, because Ralph had also done an incredible job telling stories to the group. Marvelous historic conference, and again, a transpersonal conference. Many anthropologists there, very, very unforgettable. And so those are some of my memories of the Manaus conference that both Ralph Nestor and Ram Dass attended, if my memory serves correct. At my age, one never knows. So there you have it, end of story.
Stanley, that's, as someone who's followed the history of psychedelics in the United States, that was a very interesting recap, and you mentioned many of the luminaries. We have a practical question that's come up from Claire. I'm going to let Claire pose it to you herself.
Oh, yeah. Stanley, could you tell me if you have information on the physiological effects of vomiting on activating the psychedelic events or visions? Why vomiting?
John, can you repeat that? I'm having trouble hearing.
So, Stan, the question was, do you have any information about how vomiting might activate the effects of psychedelics? Is that correct, Claire?
Oh, yes. I've never vomited myself, and I've taken psychedelics many times, for better or for worse. But you look at vomiting as being a cleansing. And when I guide people, it's not a negative thing. I should imagine that all of the negativity in your being is being expelled. I try to make the vomiting a pleasant experience for them. Yes, vomiting is very common with ayahuasca. And again, I've been on many ayahuasca sessions and have been called upon to help people, as I gave you an example, but I try to put it into negative, not negative, but positive terms. I've also guided some people with other psychedelics. In one case, a young man was vomiting into a bowl that I had. And I imagine that the whole world is swirling around in the bowl, and you're privileged to see it. So that turns it into a very positive thing. Yeah, vomiting is sort of an emetic, and I try to turn it into something positive, and I think psychophysiologic is also positive.
I understand that, but that is symbolic. I am looking for the physiological effect, the link between vomiting and what it does in the body and the psychedelic and what it does in the body. But there may not be information on this.
As far as I know, there's not very much information on it. It is well worth studying. As I said before, I look at it as an emetic, as a positive thing. And even those psychedelics, vomiting often serves a useful purpose, especially people who've had food poisoning. Mm-hmm. I've had the unfortunate experience of having food poisoning in Mexico, in India, and in Cuba. And I was in bad shape for 24 hours, and I did a lot of vomiting. And the vomiting was very, very positive. The last time I had that experience was in Cuba, where I had told people in our group, do not eat any fruit unless it's in a shell or in a covering that you can peel. You never know what might be picked up. And then on our last night in Cuba, We went to a restaurant for gazpacho, which I love gazpacho. And then I forgot my own rule. Of course, gazpacho is made from vegetables, some of them not peeled. So I got back, I was absolutely sick. Members went off to a wonderful African drum group, and I was in my room vomiting, and people were concerned with me. Look, I've been through this twice before. I'll be fine in the morning. Yes, I vomited all night. I was fine in the morning. So I've had personal experiences, and the vomiting actually served a very useful purpose in terms of expelling what I picked up during the food poisoning.
Well, Stan,
John,
go ahead.
John,
Yeah,
might the speaker next month, who's also going to be talking about psychedelics, provide an answer to this question? And can we put it on the table for him?
Yeah, I'll ask. It's going to be Nicole. She's our secretary treasurer. I'll ask her to address that. But I did have a follow-up question, Stan. It seems to me that simply the act of vomiting is going to be a sympathetic kind of stimulant. So it's going to be, activating all kinds of neurotransmitters. It's almost putting you into a fight and flight mode, I would imagine. Do you think that that would somehow or other tie into perhaps activating some of the other psychedelic responses as well?
Yes, I think you're on the right track. That's
very interesting. Yeah.
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 I have one. Have any questions? Anybody else have anything you want to say?
I'm just thinking out loud to myself that the information from the psychedelics could be stimulating the brain, as I think Claire was trying to get at. And one of the things would be the physiological response of vomiting, but the other thing might be triggering a whole series of implicit memories that come back during the psychological experience. This is just a guess off the top of my head.
I think you're on the right track. Fortunately, now there are a number of studies that show what's happening in the brain and body during psychedelics, and how various parts of the brain are more or less turned off, especially the frontal cortex, and how more attention is given to the latent reserve system, and also the amygdala, which focuses on emotion, the hippocampus, which focuses on memory. And so various parts of the more midbrain part are more activated during psychedelic experience, accounting for, as you say, the retrieval of old memories that need resolution, and also the emotions that go with it.
I think I'm going to look this up, see what I can learn about the.
Well, let me add that maybe in the material we have on treating PTSD patients with psychedelic drugs might show up some of this.
Well, of course, I've written, co-authored 2 books and many articles on veterans and PTSD. That's an interest of mine that been involved in for many, many years. And there's certainly a lot of promising work being done using psychedelics to resolve PTSD. The basic problem, as I see with PTSD, is that people have the trauma lodged in the hippocampus and amygdala, and this shows up in the nightmares. In ordinary dreaming, the whole brain is involved, starting with the old brain, where in the pons, where neurochemical impulses are channeled to the midbrain, the amygdala and hippocampus, and then to the cortex for resolution. and after we have the beautiful dreams with all their symmetry, etc. But with trauma, they can't get past the midbrain because they're lodged in the trauma memories and experiences. So they're stuck. And so psychedelics help them to get past the midbrain again into the cortex for resolution.
Interesting.
And I've always said, when treating PTSD, start by focusing to resolve the nightmares and turn the nightmares into pleasant dreams. And it's a domino effect, and everything else will then fall into place. All too often, therapists say the nightmares will resolve themselves after we do the therapy, and they focus on frontal lobe stuff instead of going back to older parts of the brain for the therapy. But you see, the psychedelics help to bypass the new brain, the frontal lobes, and focus on the older parts of the brain where the resolution can take place. Again, there have been a few dozen, at most a few hundred, successful cases of PTSD and psychedelics, and there should be thousands. So many people have been traumatized, not only in war combat, but just think of the trauma of the young people, most recently in Butler, Pennsylvania, traumatized by a school shooting. And they will be traumatized for the rest of their life in one way or another. And so treating trauma is being recognized as a major issue for psychotherapists from whatever orientation they come to. And I think psychedelics can help.
I have been reading about the difference between moral injury and PTSD. With a discussion, I'll send you the reference if you're interested, pointing out that if moral injury happens when what you are required to do is in competition with your own morality, or with your ethics. So it happens to soldiers because they've been told not to kill, and now they're told to kill. Mm-hmm. And it happens in many other environments, especially, this is a discussion for MDs, about moral injury. And they're suggesting that much of the effort to treat PTSD is gone off the rails because it isn't dealing with moral injury. And I think that is fascinating, and exactly how it would link with your discussion of the parts of the brain that are being activated or unable to activate themselves. I don't know right now, but it would be interesting to discuss.
Well, I think I follow your argument, and I think what it boils down to is that people with PTSD typically look at themselves as victims.
Yep.
And whatever therapy they attend to, the victim label has to be disposed of, and they have to look at themselves as survivors and find post-traumatic strength to help them get on with their lives. And of course, this involves reorganizing the brain in many, many ways, either directly or as a result of therapy. You're right.
Yeah, and here, what this argument is that PTSD does see individuals as victims who must become survivors, but moral injury is a community issue. It's not an individual issue. So it's very hard to recover if your community continues to ask you to do things against its own stated morality.
Oh, we have community work, of course, is very, very helpful for PTSD. I've lectured at some veteran groups where the veterans have formed a community and sort of help out each other. And in one case I can think of, they go on kayaking expeditions as a group, or go on camping trips as a group. And the bonding really helps them. And they don't often have to talk about therapy and trauma, but on positive things. And you're absolutely right. A community of PTSD survivors can certainly be very therapeutic. I just wish there were more of them.
Well, folks, we're coming up on the end of our hour and a half together. This is kind of a shame to interrupt. We can go a little bit further if Stan is willing to, and if the rest of you want to stay for a few more minutes.
John, could you repeat that?
Oh, I'm just saying we're coming up on the end of our normally scheduled time. We could go for a few more minutes if everyone wants to, and if there are.
Good heavens, if you're running all the time, yes, I have one other anecdote, very important.
Okay, that'll be a good closer.
Yes. Once I became involved in psychedelics, I learned about how Albert Hoffman had actually discovered LSD-25, the 25th iteration of what he was looking for, which was looking for a dye, actually, for fabrics. Never dreamed that I actually would meet Albert Hoffman. But once I was invited to various psychedelic conferences, he was often the honored guest. And at these conferences, he would bring along his wife, Erica, who was ignored. I spent my time with Erica. And so that really endeared myself to Albert. And eventually, he invited me to visit him at his home in Switzerland. And he, of course, would not write me the address. He said, come to such and such a town and then phone me and I will tell you how to find me. So I was with a few German students who drove me there in their psychedelic van, and we found him and Erica in their lovely home overlooking this pleasant meadow. And I told my friend, you can ask him one question. And it worked out very well. They asked him one question and they got beautiful and lovely answers. And right now I am looking at a picture of Albert Hoffman in that standing in front of the psychedelic van with the three students, and also a piece of paper in which he wrote the LSD molecule and signed to my good friend Stanley Krippner, Albert Hoffman, with the molecule in the middle. Coincidentally, I'm looking at that right now. And then when he turned 100, I was invited to give a talk at his 100th birthday party. Never dreamed this would happen. I was actually invited to do 3 talks. I thought, look, that's too much. And so I shared my time with people who should have been invited to talks, but are overlooked. One from Colombia, one from Mexico, one from Chile. People who had extensive experience with psychedelics. It was a glorious conference. And again, I have a photograph of myself and Albert at that conference, quite memorable. So being at that conference, the 100th anniversary of Albert's birth, the discovery of LSD, I thought, look, this is the capstone of my psychedelic career. Nothing can ever equal that. I'll sort of retire.
I also had the privilege once of meeting Albert Hoffman and visiting him in his house, and I understand exactly what you said. One anecdote, when I visited with my wife, he was telling me that he still very much enjoyed LSD, but he said, oh, my wife doesn't like it. She prefers MDMA. So, and they were in their mid-90s at the time. So that's how that goes. Well, we'll wrap it up now. I'm going to close the recording down.